Hi everybody, this is going to be a sample presentation of the project that I have assigned for our Natural Resources unit. As it says in the syllabus, and I'm expecting about a 10-slide PowerPoint presentation or at least a 5-minute recorded presentation that you would either play for the class or that I would video record so that we had some documentation of it. So this first page is my title page. It has the name of the natural resource that I'm doing, solar energy, and it also has my name. It would have my partner's name on it too if I worked in a pair. Moving on to the next slide, I'm expecting some sort of definition, some sort of fun fact about it. Remember that when you're giving a presentation, you don't have to read what is exactly on the slide. In fact, you shouldn't. You should reference what's on the slide, but then you should also expand on it or talk more about it. So here I've included a quote from National Geographic, but it's not really a definition of solar energy. So here I would say something like, solar energy is the heat from the sun that is converted into usable energy. Or some sort of definition for whatever your natural resource is. Also notice that I've included the source of the quote on the bottom. It's from National Geographic. I'd also like to mention the use of credible and non-credible sources. We've talked about this a little bit in class so far, but notice that National Geographic is, a published research magazine. It's not like Cosmopolitan, it's not like 17, it's a research magazine. I would consider that a credible resource. So when you're citing your sources, you can either do it like this, or you can have one credits page at the end. I've included both so you can see how they both work. Moving on to slide 3, why is solar power important? Why is your natural resource important? Well, what can you do with it? So here I've included another quote. Again, I wouldn't read the quote word for word. I know that my audience can read. So I would mention the quote, maybe highlight a couple things in it, but then I would also provide examples of how solar energy is used. And then again, you can see it is a quote, so I've included the citation on the bottom. Moving on to the next slide, somehow this energy needs to be collected, whether you have coal, oil, wind energy. The wind can't just blow. You need some way to harness that energy. So here I've shown the 2 ways that I found in my research that are the main ways that solar energy is collected. There's active and passive solar systems and buildings, and they both do different things. So that's why I've included 2 different kind of definitions. And then I've also included my source at the bottom again, like you can see. So as we talked about in class a little bit on how to make a good presentation, you shouldn't have a lot of words on each slide. This is kind of a lot, but if you're going to talk about everything that's on there, it's easier than just having a bunch up there that your audience has to read, and then you have to talk about everything that's on the slide and everything you're going to say. So this is kind of a lot. So I've chosen to move on and take more slides for each definition instead of just having that one and then talking about it for a long time. This helps to keep your audience interested. So here's more examples of how an active solar system works. And this isn't a solar system like the planets, it's a system to retrieve solar energy. So what happens is these are the solar panels that you see, out and about. They use the energy, they heat a fluid, either a liquid or air. And remember how we talked about in physical science that air is a liquid just like water is a liquid. And then it uses that solar heat and it transfers it into a space or a storage system. This would be like a water heater that you have in your house. And then usually there's an auxiliary or a backup heating system, because let's say it was really cloudy and you didn't get a lot of sunshine, then you wouldn't be able to take a hot shower, and that would not be fun at all. So that's where the auxiliary comes in. On the next slide, I've chosen to include a picture. So you can see the house, the sun shining on it, you can see the solar panel, and then it highlights where the water is coming in. That's the cold blue arrow going up. It's getting heated on the solar panel, and then the hot red arrow is going down into the storage tank, and then also the boiler water heater. That's the example of that auxiliary power. Notice on the bottom that it has the copyright information of the picture. Your picture either needs to include this or you need to make sure that you cite it, because just like a quote, remember that pictures can have copyright on them too, and we want to make sure that we're not breaking any of those rules. Moving on to the next slide, it goes back to the passive solar on the couple slides before, and there are even more kinds of passive solar buildings. So what you could have done for this slide is either had direct gain, indirect gain, and isolated gain on different slides. I've chosen to include them on all 3 on one, just so that you can see what 10 slides looks like. It would have been just as appropriate to have them on 3 different slides, and again with my quote there at the bottom that you can see. Here's another diagram, and this one didn't have the copyright information on it, so I included it myself. And you can notice that the diagrams that I'm using are pretty simple. They don't have a ton of words on them. They don't have really confusing arrows. They don't really have words on them that you don't know or that your audience doesn't know. So maybe like aperture, like maybe you don't know that or your audience doesn't know that. And make sure to look stuff like that up before you give your presentation, because if there's a question and answer session and you can't define one of the words in your diagrams, it's not going to look so hot. So just remember that when you're picking out pictures. Moving on to the next slide, the last requirement of your natural resource presentation is how it looks being used in the United States and what would happen if we like switched to it or continued to use it. Let's say if it was coal, if we continued to use coal a lot. So I am obviously doing solar energy, so I put a couple stats up from what solar energy is in the United States right now and about how we don't really use a lot of it and how complicated it would be if we were to switch all right now. So it only provides 0.2% of the total energy consumed in the United States. That is nothing. That's way nothing. So you see solar panels a lot of places, but it's really not that much. And then it would take 10,000 square miles of solar panels to meet the current U.S. electricity needs. So that's a problem that you would probably talk about in your presentation about what we're going to do to fix that, or what we would have to do to fix it if we were going to use solar power as the main energy source. This is my last content slide. It's kind of rounding out solar energy in the United States and why it's a good idea. So it's very site specific. You can have solar panels on anybody's house, even if it's way out in the mountains where you don't want to run power lines. And that's the remote location and the reduced cost of building power lines thing. It costs a lot of money to build the telephone poles, put the wires together, bring them in with helicopters, pay people to connect them. That costs a lot. So having these site-specific locations of solar energy is much cheaper in the long run. It's more expensive to install, but it's cheaper in the long run. So things like that are what I'm expecting you to include in your presentation about the trade-offs that we're going to see. And then, as I promised, here's an example of a works cited page. I chose to list them in the order in which they appear in my presentation. Another way to do it is to alphabetize them, but I didn't really think that was appropriate for this presentation because 3 of my sources start with solar and one of them is the solar. So alphabetizing would be confusing. You'd have to dig a little more. So I chose to present them in the order in which they were used to make it easier for my audience to find. So this concludes kind of the video of what I'm expecting from you, and if you have any questions, please let me know.